Hello, this is Unbound Sage, and today I'd like to talk about pity rates. I want to start with everything is subject to change. This is a tough video, right? I contemplated making this or not, because this is probably something that is going to change. I imagine it will. It has to, right? However, my goal has always been to inform the community and to help people make better decisions. And, to that end, I will make this video. I will give you the raw data, and I will give you my my breakdown of it. Right? That's what you guys come here for. So with that, I'm gonna get started. So drop rates, fine. They're fine. They're raid. This is kind of what we expected, just from the way Simon talks and the mini game. Right? We kind of got a vibe that ancestrals were similar to raid. The only difference is raid is a little bit more generous with mortals. They give it's a 1.4% chance to get a rare. However, I don't see these are green stones. I don't see this being a source of rares. I don't think it matters at all. This is a non-issue for me. A little sad that there is no chance to get epics or legendaries in Dirk's podcast, or when I had Dirk on the channel. He said that they were playing around with the idea of having epics and legendaries pulled here, a very, very small percent chance. It looks like they scrapped that, probably with the ecosystem and stuff. They felt it was unnecessary. It's fine, right? A little sad, but that doesn't. This isn't the reason I made a grim opening, right? Here, 3 of these I'm quite happy with. I think this is extremely generous. A lot of people like to talk about on rate. Right? And how they do that is they do 100 divided by the percent that's given here. 100 divided by 1 is 100. And so 80 is below rate. It's very good. Right? It's good for us. We have to do less work to get our thing. I find this calculation to be quite rudimentary and not sophisticated enough that I would like to talk about. I'd like to talk about more sophisticated measurements of probability, right? However, if we're going to do the on rate thing, here, right? This is on rate. 100 divided by 1/2 is 200, and there's 200. Right? That's on rate. On rate's good. On rate's fine, right? That's happy. Cool. However, every 40 you see here is not on rate. And the goal of this video is to, convince the community and convince Fateless that this is not okay. It's not okay. When I saw these 40s, I was concerned, and when I did the math, it's a slap in the face. It's honestly disrespectful. These 40 numbers here, and now everything is subject to change. This best be one of the things subject to change. This is insulting, especially considering that flawless stones are the rarest stones. They are. And I imagine, I don't know the cost of them, but these will cost money, a significant amount of money. Even in my video, it was, I think I did $12.50 for the base rate. Yeah, this is a lot of money. And this is not on rate. On rate for flawless is, if we use the rudimentary version, is 16.6 repeating, right? So 17. And then for epics as well, this should be 12.5. Like, do 12 or 13. Because 100 divided by 8 is 12.5. However, I told you, on rate is rudimentary. We're better than that here. I will present better information to community. Here's the master sheet. I broke down the cumulative chance to get a hero from each shard, so we can use the best information we have. How to read this? This is the Godforge cumulative chance for purple and blue epics. So obviously you have an 8% chance the first time you pull, right? When you pull 2, you don't have 16. That's not how probability works. So this formula here will calculate our chance, the chance to see at least one right? Or is it exactly one? It's at least one. At least one. So I have one rate marked here, by the way. Save this for later. Put a pin in this one. I also have rates here. Now, rates pity system is considered to be one of the least generous pity systems ever. For epics, out of blue and purple shards, Raid's pity system is objectively better than Godforge. You can make no argument that Godforge is less generous than Raid when it comes to rate per shard. This does not matter about the number of shards you get. Obviously, Godforge has announced they will give out a lot more shards. However, when it comes to individual pity, it is significantly worse. Significantly. When we look, I talk about more sophisticated things, I like to use 95 and 99% certainty, right? At 24 shards, Raid gives you my first breakpoint, the 95% certainty. Okay. And then at 27 shards, it gives me my second breakpoint at 99% certainty. These are decision-making tools I use when to pull shards. I do not use average rate. I use pity. But this is also another decision factor I make. I set my calculators and I decide this. Godforge does not even hit 90%, let alone my first threshold of 95%. It doesn't even hit 95% by the time. This is guaranteed pity in Raid. 32 blue and purples will give you an epic in Raid 100% of the time. This is not guaranteed. This is rounding error, right? 32 is 100% guaranteed. And at the guaranteed for Raid, you do not hit my first threshold of 95%. All of these numbers are objectively worse, right? And then this is hard pity for Godforge. Now, in Raid's formula, it has ramping, so it'll say 100 here. This is 100% chance here, but I want to keep this number here for later use, right? Now here, this is your chance to get a legendary in both Raid and Godforge from yellow shards, right? So obviously you have your 6% chance in both. At 13, right? So at 12, you'll see this formula. At 13, Raid has its, its increased chance. So that's why it uses a different formula here. And we can see that 95, 24 again, just by happenstance. And then at 99, 28. Godforge is not there. And then it has, this is a rounding error, but it has 99.999% chance, or 99.995, whatever, at 36. And this is hard pity for Godforge. This is hard pity for Raid. So there is an argument that Godforge has this hard pity earlier. However, I think there's a strong argument to say that Raid's pity is better, right? And when one of the worst pity systems I have ever seen, there's obviously no pity systems, but systems that have pity, I think Raid is one of the most greedy, and Godforge is worse in these categories, in the 40s. These two and this one, I've just kind of showed that here. So what numbers would I change, or rather, how can I further convince you about how bad this is? Because some of you guys might be like, "Well, Sage, you're being way too harsh." Let me drive the point home. This is the probability that they ask you to get to give you a rare. Right? This is the 80, this is the guaranteed. It's asking you to get to 55.25%. This is very generous, right? Here, it doesn't give you pity until 91.5 and 96.4. And the same thing here, the more realistic system here, let me check my numbers here, just keep going down. This one, 200, right? 36.3, I am blocking the screen, I realize. 63.3 is what the game asks me to get to give me a guaranteed legendary with my blue shards. Why is the game asking me for so much more to get a legendary with my orange shards, my yellow shards? And it's asking me much more to get to this. This is much harder to get to than 63. 63 is on rate, right? 63.3. If we go to the rate, this is where you hit above 63.3. The on rate is consistent with what you've chosen for your blues. Why are these 40%? Why are these 40 pools so much worse? They might say, you might come up with a myriad of arguments. Let me drive the nail in the coffin. When everyone looked at this, they say, okay, this is fine. I am going to give you the equivalent of what this is saying. Let's go to this pity. 91.58. When do we hit that pulling blue shards? 91. Was it 0.58? Here. 494. If I told you to pour 494 summons to guarantee a legendary from your ancestrals, you would quit. You would quit the game. You would look at the 0.5, you would look at the 400, almost 500, and you'd quit. You need to pull 500 blues to guarantee a legendary is ludicrous. This is asking you to do a similar task. Equivalent task. This is asking you an equivalent task. But yet, people are defending this. That means this task is 2.5 times harder than this task. Okay. Let's do this one. Let's drive the point home. 96.44. 96.44. 666. Ominous. This is asking you the same thing as pulling 666 stones, right? It is a similar task. That's why I'm outraged by these. I'm outraged, but I'm sure they'll change, right? Everything is subject to change. Remember that. Conclusions. Half of Godforge pity rates on paper is worse than raid. And I'd say this is an ill omen. Because to make up for this, I will need 2.5% times the amount of stones to make this up. And I maybe Godforge will give you that. But that is to be, on rate with this summon, right? You may need more than that to make the claim you are more generous than raid. With how poor these are. These are quite poor pities. So unless we get 3 times the amount of flawless in Godforge as we do in raid, I would expect to see this number changed, or I don't want to hear Fateless claim that they're more generous than raid when it comes to summoning. At least in this category. Right? I'd like that caveat. Because one thing I won't stand for is false advertising. And I'll watch for it. Right? And I think this is a genuine mistake. I don't think there's any malice here. But I am watching. Same thing here, right? This is a little bit more difficult because this summon rate is good. I think the only solution here is to lower this here. And plus, it never feels good. And this is something that we saw from the Simon live stream. It never feels good to pull multiple 10 pulls of rares. Putting it to 13, or even putting it to 10, which is much more generous, but it's only epics after all. It feels better. But mathematically, I've proven how poor this pity rate is, And people are feeling this in the minigame already, and they're not happy. Right? Lastly, but I do not want to hear anyone say that Godforge is less generous than Raid. Why is that? We have not seen the Aetherstone income rate. So until we see this, we can draw no conclusions about the generosity of Godforge. The reason I make this video is so I can bring it to Fateless's attention and bring it to the community's attention of a potential pain point that I have found. Right? Now with that, I have done my duty as a community member and as a CC. It was a painful video to make. I did not like making this video. I hope not to have to make another one in the future, but I will. My number one priority is to the Godforge community. My number one priority is to help people make good decisions. But this video was painful to make. Making the data sheet was painful. It was. So, but seeing people be uninformed is more painful. There we go. Take it easy, guys. I'll keep watching out for stuff like this, but I'm sure this will change. Let's end this on a positive note. Make sure you like and subscribe and comment, whatever. See you later. Bye.